Hi everyone, this is Phil Travis, and this week's presentation is going to be on the Roman Empire and the development of the Roman Empire, the end of the Republic, and the role that the Roman Empire plays in establishing very important connections throughout the Mediterranean world, and how these connections facilitate the development and expansion of Christianity within the Mediterranean and ultimately in Rome and beyond. So empire as a term comes from the word imperium. This is the Latin word. It's a Roman word, imperium, that means the right to command. Empires refer to large political units. They are expansionist. They're traditionally ruled by a monarch or an emperor, though not necessarily the case. Pretty much all historians would agree that the United States was an empire in the 20th century. But nonetheless, the United States was never an empire controlled by a monarch or an emperor, right? The United States is a representative republic in the 20th century. And so traditionally empires are ruled by a monarch or an emperor, but not necessarily. They control diverse areas of people. They can also be formal and informal. And what this means is a formal empire refers to an empire in which the imperial power directly controls another people by using their military and their military and their governing power to literally control physically another people. So a great example of a formal empire would be like the British colonization of Africa during the 1800s. An informal empire refers to an empire that controls other areas and realms more through indirect means, economic power, the positioning of military bases, and so forth. And the United States is typically defined in the 20th century as an informal empire, where they use markets and economic power to control rather than the forceful taking of colonies. Though the United States did in the 20th century take some colonies like the Philippines, generally the United States' empire was more informal than a formal empire. Empires make up what we would call large network spheres, large areas that are interconnected, that facilitate trade, migration, and the movement of goods, ideas, religions, and so forth. They can facilitate some very negative things. They can also indirectly facilitate some very um, constructive developments, as the movement of goods and ideas can change how people think about their world. They can change diets for the better, improving the health of people. They can expand religions and change the way people think about their place in the world. They can facilitate the free movement of peoples and migrations of peoples to other realms as well. By contrast, too, an empire could be contrasted to a nation state. Nation states are basically single units. They are based on the idea that a single people in a single territory constitute itself as a unique political community. Okay, so a nation state proclaims the commonality of its people. Even if reality is more complicated, it proclaims the commonality of its people. So all Americans are individuals who believe in representative self-government and believe that all Americans have certain natural rights. We have certain commonality in this country about civic rights, about the nature of government, the role of government, the rights of people, the nature of our justice system, and so forth. So nation states involve the comprising of a single unique political community that proclaims the commonality of its people. Nation states oftentimes are the hub, if you will, for the creation of an expanded empire beyond. So again, if you were to look at Italy and Rome, the Italian peninsula or the Roman peninsula might be defined as a nation state. What establishes out in the Mediterranean, in Greece, in Egypt, in Palestine, in North Africa, in Gaul, in Europe, is its empire, where it uses its control economically, its military power to control large areas of people. And the empire usually controls these large areas of people for its own benefit in terms of power, economics, trade, and so forth. But it can facilitate the extension and sharing of important aspects of connectivity. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. A key factor in the development of the Roman Empire was war. Even though Rome, the Roman Republic, was ultimately successful in the Punic Wars nonetheless facilitated the development of some fundamental problems in the domestic realm of Rome, and ultimately sowed the seeds for the civil war in Rome, and ultimately the rise of empire and the end of a republic. So the rise of a dictatorial system over a representative system. The Punic Wars were fought between Carthage and Rome, and I'll show you Carthage on a map here in just a second. Carthage is located on the tip of what is modern Tunisia, very close to Rome. Carthage was an old Phoenician outpost. They were excellent traders and excellent seafarers, and they were a natural enemy of Rome. The Punic Wars began largely over disputes over territories in what is modern-day Spain, the Iberian Peninsula. And at one point, the Carthaginian general Hannibal actually invaded Italy proper and took his army over the Alps down into Italy and waged war on the heartland of Rome. And this almost resulted in the defeat of Rome. Hannibal sort of outran his resources and his logistic lines, and this gave him problems. And in addition, the Roman general Scipio would go to Carthage and besiege Carthage, forcing Hannibal to return, where Scipio would ultimately defeat Hannibal. But in the end, Rome is successful in the war with Carthage. At the beginning of the war with Carthage, by the way, much of the early phase of the war was naval war, and the Romans didn't even have a navy. They had to build a navy kind of, they had to build a navy in the immediate moment, which they were able to do rather effectively. But in the end, Carthage is defeated by the Romans in the Punic Wars. And in the third phase of the Punic War, Scipio, who was then a member of the Senate, led a call for the complete and unnecessary destruction of Carthage, in which Carthage was destroyed and the Romans allegedly salted the earth so that no one could ever come back and inhabit the area again. So in the end, it results in the complete destruction of Carthage. But it also sowed some seeds, as we'll see, for the development of civil war and ultimately empire in Rome. This is a look at the Roman Empire at its full expanse. This is a depiction of Carthaginian and Roman influence at the time of the Punic Wars. And much of the beginnings of the conflicts of the Punic War were actually about conflicts between the Carthaginians and the Romans in the area of modern-day Spain, the Iberian Peninsula. And it was from the Iberian Peninsula that Hannibal would launch his invasion of the Italian Peninsula, as he took a whole army with war elephants and all over the Alps into the Italian Peninsula. Oftentimes, empires come with consequences. When you become a large, expansive state, controlling large, far-flung realms where you have to fight oftentimes to maintain, these can cost a lot of money. And also, empires are usually built and developed through war, and wars can fundamentally alter the domestic realm in terms of the domestic economy and in terms of individuals' civil liberties and so forth. Just as in the United States today, you've seen as the United States in the 20th century has become an international power, there have been periodically certain restraints that have, occurred to Americans in the domestic realm. And so that is, problems in the domestic sphere can be one of the consequences of empire. And we see this in Rome. As a result of the Punic Wars, you had really the conquest and destruction of much of the Italian peninsula as Hannibal invaded Italy. Well, the result of this is that many of the small landowners had to go out and fight in the Punic Wars. Many of them died. Their fields went fallow. when Hannibal's conquering many of the lands destroyed. And the result of this is that after the Punic Wars, large landed estates increasingly snatch up the land and form these large, they're called latifundas, large plantation systems. And these are slave plantation systems. And so you had an increasing dominance of large landowners and an increasing absence of small landowners. And so increasingly this resulted in the growth of landlessness. And it also played into the development of a government that was driven by a handful of powerful aristocrats who were serving personal interests rather than the interests of the state. And there were, for example, the case of the Gracchus brothers. There are periods in which individuals will come in before the rise of Julius Caesar. Individuals will come in to try to reform the system, or reform the kind of problems with really wealth inequality. And the Gracchus brothers were the most known for coming in and trying to fix the system, this system in which wealth inequality and landlessness had become such a problem. And they tried to pass reforms, and in each case they were resisted and killed by powerful opponents from the Senate, who resisted their attempts to regulate this system or this reality of inequality in Rome after the Punic Wars. The result of the Punic Wars is increasingly you have generals and politicians vying for power. And politicians really become associated with military power. People rise in the ranks politically in Rome at this time, oftentimes, at least in part, through military leadership. And in a lot of respects, the Roman Republic, by the time of civil war here, and by the time leading up to the rise of Julius Caesar, increasingly started to look more and more like kind of mafia factions, in which really, really powerful people who owned land, who owned property and real estate. Some of the most powerful figures in the Roman Civil War were effectively slumlords, where they owned like apartment buildings in Rome and made lots and lots of money on this. But increasingly you have factions that are built around individuals who use their money and their power and their position to maximize their own power. They're serving their own self-interest rather than the interests of the state. And this creates ultimately the perfect storm for a civil war, where we have politics and military figures vying for political power by creating factions and creating their own armies. And their own armies and these own factions will fight with each other to try to dominate the Roman system. The Civil War period in Rome really results in the rise of empire. And in a lot of respects, the Civil War was long-term caused by the aftermath of the Punic Wars. And the problems that groups like individuals like the Gracchus brothers were unable to solve. Civil war in Rome will ultimately give rise to an empire. The three most known generals during the Civil War, but hardly the only, were Gaius Marius, Lucius Sulla, and Julius Caesar. Sulla represented a group known as the Optimates, and these individuals had personal armies ultimately, and they used these armies to gain political power and to punish their political opponents. Hence why Sulla uses his army to lead a reign of terror in Rome that kills about 10,000. Julius Caesar was building his power as part of a political group known as the Populares. And Caesar really, what Caesar's biggest attribute was as a leader and a figure was not only his ability to read others and not only his ability to make a gamble, but also in his ability to speak and appeal to people. Julius Caesar was an excellent public speaker, and he used his gift at oratory to gain the voice of common people, to gain the voice of people that many of the other figures in Roman politics at the time completely ignored. And so he really was able to maximize popular support behind him and use that as a powerful chip in his play for power in Rome. Caesar also was not a huge landowner. He didn't have a lot of real estate. He didn't have a lot of personal wealth. He was very much an upstart without a lot of this kind of established wealth of his contemporaries, individuals like Pompey, for example. Julius Caesar, therefore, was able to, he sought to take gambles to build his political career. He one time was given the job of organizing gladiatorial games. It was a huge risk for him because he didn't have any money, and so he had to take out big loans to do it. But in the process of running the gladiatorial games, he's able to build his presence as a figure and build his popularity. At one point, he even gained an appointment to the position of Pontificus Maximus, which was the head of state religion. And he uses these types of positions to give himself a kind of visibility, to expand his power. At this time during the Civil War, we have the rise of a new kind of military too, and this was a military made up largely of sort of common people, and armies were generally more loyal to their leader in their army than they were to the state. And so this is a fundamental characteristic of the time of civil war. Julius Caesar became emperor of Rome after his crossing of the Rubicon. And the Rubicon's a river, the Rubicon River, in 49 BCE. Caesar had, at that point, Caesar had earned his marks as a military man, leading conquests in Gaul. Gaul refers to France, Western Europe, basically. Of course, before we would call it France, but that's the area of Western Europe. He was a ruthless leader, militarily speaking, and he was an incredibly driven and savvy political figure. Caesar had used his ability to build relationships in Rome, political relationships in Rome, and he had taken a lot of chance and gambled in the political spectrum, and he had even obtained the position prior to this of Pontificate Maximus, which was the head of Roman state religion. Caesar was called back to Rome because the Senate in Rome feared that Caesar's power was becoming so great in his military victories in Gaul that they were concerned about him trying to ultimately seize power. And so they asked Caesar to give up his military leadership in Gaul and to come back to Rome and to join a position in the Senate. Caesar will ultimately refuse this, and many scholars believe that he very much waffled over his decision as to whether or not he would give up his military command, or if he would march his army across the Rubicon River and ultimately sack Rome effectively. And of course, he decides on the latter, and he crosses the Rubicon River in 49 BCE. And as the story is told, he remarked that the die is cast, meaning that at this point there was no turning back. He was either going to seize power in Rome and become an emperor, or he was going to be defeated. And of course, he does seize power. And as an emperor in Rome, Caesar was really a people's leader. And this very much lined up with the things he had been doing as he came to power. He used his power as an orator, as a speaker, to appeal to masses of people. He created legions in his army that were loyal to him. He was a popular leader, and as an emperor, he very much did a lot of things that would be seen as very popular to many people. He extended citizenship to people in frontier areas of Rome. He created huge building projects and employment programs for people. He confiscated wealthy lands and reappointed land to poor and loyal soldiers. These were all very, very important and desirable things for people that supported Caesar, for the popular kind of sentiment in Rome, of at least Roman commoners. He also, however, undermined the Senate's authority, and by undermining the Senate's authority, he will ultimately be assassinated in 44 BCE, and this will result in not only his death, but it will result in 13 years of political strife in which a faction associated with Mark Antony and Cleopatra will vie with factions led by his adopted son Octavian, and Octavian ultimately becomes known as Augustus. He was assassinated. The assassins were led by an individual named Brutus, and Brutus was actually the same name of the individual who had led the ouster of the last monarch of the area of monarchy in Rome. And he was stabbed some 23 times on the floor of the Senate. Augustus Caesar, I'll go ahead and put these up for you. Augustus Caesar, originally Octavian, came to power in the final phase of a civil war as he ultimately defeated the alliance of Mark Antony and Cleopatra, who had sought to secede Egypt from Roman power. Mark Antony and Cleopatra were ultimately, and they were part of a larger strategy at the end of the civil war that resulted following Julius Caesar's death, in which Octavian effectively hunted down with his allies those associated with the crime, and effectively, they either were killed or committed suicide. And Mark Antony and Cleopatra had gone to Egypt seeking to create their own power in Egypt, and ultimately Cleopatra and Mark Antony will be forced to commit suicide amid the conquest of the allies of Augustus, ultimately Augustus Caesar or Octavian. When Octavian takes power formally in 27 BCE, he brings stability. And the way he does this is he was a very savvy leader when it came to power and when it came to the organized mannerisms of the old Roman Republic. So he ultimately is the individual who has complete authority. He has all the power. But he disguises the monarchy as a republic. And the way he does this is while he still had pretty much all of the authority, he will effectively delegate the Senate's power will remain in place, but it will be only a sort of figurehead of power. All the authority ultimately laid with Augustus, but the Senate, many of the Senate's like basic procedures and orders of operation and so forth remained in place. And so he gave the Senate the sense of still existing, of still functioning, of still mattering. And this helps him to limit the opposition that his total extreme authority as a monarch might bring. He also consolidates military and political power. He reforms the military, and he uses his rise to power in purging the enemies that had been associated with the assassination of Julius Caesar as an opportunity to consolidate power. He appoints those who are loyal to him. He consolidates all power behind Augustus Caesar. And he's very cautious in his dealings with his opponents. He makes sure that his opponents in the Senate still feel as though they have power. He effectively is very savvy with preventing alienating those who might seek to overthrow him. Octavian also went to great lengths to use the heritage of the Roman Republic as a way of building popular support, a base of power. He very much tried to facilitate sort of traditional Roman values, if you will, as through law, as a way of promoting the idea that he was the right, true, and just, and most fit Roman leader. And this involved things like, for example, passing laws that fined men who didn't marry, rewarding families that had more than 2 children, passing a law that deemed that a widow who was widowed for more than 2 years had to remarry, passing laws against adultery, against promiscuity, and these types of things. In fact, Augustus Caesar had his daughter exiled from Rome, in part because she was deemed to be promiscuous. And this came at the same time as Augustus himself had several mistresses himself. But it wasn't about what Augustus was actually doing. It was about how Augustus presented what he was doing. And from that standpoint, he presented himself as upholding and uplifting and pursuing the traditional sort of values of Roman society and family. And he does that, and that allows him to appear as a truly Roman, as a person who, even though he was all-powerful, had faith and confidence in the old ways of Rome. He disguises his monarchy as a republic by allowing the Senate to effectively stay in place and maintain the idea that it had power when in fact it had none. And this helps him to build a wide base of support, and helps him to take Rome into really its greatest period, the period of empire under Augustus Caesar, under the Pax Romana, which means the Roman peace, in which Rome, the Mediterranean Sea, became like a Roman lake, in which trade was facilitated and the movement of goods and ideas were facilitated like never before. And it was also the time in which Rome took the most territory of any other period than during Augustus. The Pax Romana refers to the Roman peace. The Roman Empire, positive elements of the Roman Empire were the control of the Mediterranean, allowing for stability in terms of trade, migration. It makes possible for the expansion of Christianity. In general, helps to facilitate linkages with faraway lands, which create new religions, creates changes in diets, new economies, and so forth. Huge infrastructure developments, road systems, aqueducts, which bring water into the cities, building innovations like concrete, were all facilitated by this period of power and strength of the Roman Empire. Negative elements of the empire, slavery. Wide and diverse groups from faraway lands are enslaved in the Roman Empire. War in general. I mean, Carthage is utterly destroyed in the process of Rome becoming an empire. There are brutal battles and conflicts fought in Gaul. Ecological damage, extinction of animals from faraway lands. So there's a lot of negative side effects and negative elements to the Roman Empire, to empire in general as well. This is a picture of a road, a Roman road in England. This was built under Trajan, about 117 Common Era. The Roman Empire, the Pax Romana, kind of ironically facilitated the development and expansion of Christianity. During the Jewish War, the Romans who are bringing the Jewish realm under control, we see the development of Jewish sects. One ultimately would be known as Christianity, but another is the Essenes. And these Jewish sects were both common because they both shared a messianic belief, a belief in a Messiah who would return to deliver the people from the injustices that they faced. The Essenes were a Jewish sect that we learned about because of the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls. And the Dead Sea Scrolls, which were discovered in these caves in parts of what is today modern-day Palestine, showed that there were other Jewish sects that had this belief in a Messiah. And that really tells a lot about the desperation of the Jewish situation at this time as they faced control and war from the Romans. Messianic traditions are a testament to a period of desperation in which people face potential destruction at the hands of another. And so you see, in one respect, Rome's like conquests are facilitating the development of these different sects of Judaism. But the irony of this is that the Roman Empire will ultimately facilitate the spreading of Christianity, which is carried out primarily by Paul of Tarsus, who was originally known as Saul. Saul is the one who originally was among the persecutors of Christians. And it was Saul who, on the Damascus Road in the Bible, converted. He was blinded and converted to Christianity and becomes the foremost author of the New Testament, and also the one most responsible with the spreading of Christianity throughout the Mediterranean during the time of the Pax Romana. Christianity in Rome was persecuted, though it was never, you never see a systematic persecution in Rome. When you talk about in Rome proper, Christianity was an alternative religious sect, a Jewish sect that was viewed a little bit strangely. It was seen as an underground movement. It was seen as a little bit of a secret society, and so it was seen with skepticism. And there were periods in which there were formal persecutions of Jewish people, of Christian people, I'm sorry. But generally, Christianity in Rome was not systematically persecuted. That's a misconception, that throughout the entirety of the Pax Romana period and beyond, that Christianity was somehow persecuted day in and day and night for every day of the Roman Empire. And that's not the case. In fact, the persecutions were usually not systemic, but rather representing particular periods of time in Rome. For example, if there was a plague, you might find persecution of Christians, as Christians might be blamed for the problem. Christians were oftentimes viewed as atheists because they didn't practice Roman state religion, and so sometimes the presence of the Christians were blamed for economic downturns, for other problems within Rome. But the persecution of Christians does not happen systemically, but rather it happens in pockets during the time of particular leaders like Nero, Decius, and Diocletian, to name a few. Christianity ultimately actually became the state religion of Rome, and it was Constantine. Constantine was the Roman emperor who really founds the city of Constantinople, which becomes Istanbul ultimately. But Constantinople was founded by Constantine. Constantine converted to Christianity. And the story that he had, the story of his conversion was that he had basically, had a revelation while on the battlefield, and he converts to Christianity. And in 313, Constantine will issue the Edict of Milan, legalizing Christianity, and ultimately Christianity will become the state religion in Rome. And you will see the Council of Nicaea canonizing Catholic scripture beginning as early as 325. And so Christianity ultimately is embraced in the Roman Empire and becomes the state religion, really beginning most with Constantine. And the reason, of course, would probably be because Constantine understood the attractiveness of Christianity. Christianity was a religion of salvation. It offered to its devotees eternal life. It offered salvation. And no other Roman state religion really did that. And so it was becoming very popular amongst the people. And so undoubtedly Constantine saw this as a way to facilitate and further the power of the Roman state. But Christianity, it's ironic because Christianity at first was a product in part of Roman conquest and control in the area of Palestine. And then ultimately, through the Pax Romana, it facilitates the spreading of Christianity, and eventually Christianity becomes the state religion of Rome by the beginning of the 4th century Common Era, which is about 150 years before the formal collapse of Rome, which technically happens in 476 Common Era. In the city of Rome, there were many, many theaters. There was running water, plumbing. There were public baths throughout the city that could be used by the public. There were numerous temples. However, in poor areas, it could be very dirty. There was always a risk of fire. The worst fire, of course, notoriously during the tyrannical imperial leadership of Nero. fires oftentimes devastated poor areas of the city. Poor areas were notorious for outbreaks of disease and of sewage in the streets. It was said that the Roman aristocrats, when they would go through the poorer districts, would hold a rose to their nose because of their attempt to not smell the horrid smells that that may have been commonplace in these parts of the city. Caesar, of course, made his name appealing to the masses of people. Masses of people that many, Julius Caesar I'm talking about, that many individuals did not seek to appeal to. Gladiatorial games were also a fundamental part of entertainment in Roman life. The gladiatorial games could be battles between gladiators. They could be areas where criminals may be effectively executed. Some Christians were killed in gladiatorial games during periods of persecution. Many wild beasts were killed in gladiatorial games. Chariot racing was also a huge fascination. The Romans loved chariot racing, and the Circus Maximus could entertain thousands of spectators to see the chariot races. And we go to the Byzantine Empire. In the Eastern Roman Empire, next chapter, you'll see that chariot racing was even more of a fascination for the Byzantine as it became intertwined with Byzantine politics. Another area that was very influential from Roman life during the Age of Empire was the law system. Basic principles like innocent until proven guilty, the right to challenge your accuser before a judge, the power of judges to set aside laws, and so forth, were all precedents that we see developed in the Roman legal system. I want to show you a few pictures from Pompeii. Pompeii was a kind of resort-like city for Romans. It's located in the Italian peninsula. It's located below the volcanic mountain, Mount Vesuvius. And in 79 Common Era, so this is the era of the Pax Romana. It's after the death of Augustus, but it's still during a period known as the period of the Five Good Emperors. It's during the Pax Romana. And Mount Vesuvius blew its top. This was a cinder cone, or is a cinder cone volcano, and so when it goes off, it throws tremendous amounts of pyroclastic material into the air. And two cities were buried completely, Herculaneum and Pompeii. And these were huge discoveries made in I think in the 60s and 70s is when they really were discovered. And they found these cities completely buried by ash. And these were huge stories in National Geographic magazines on this, because the cities were completely buried and left much of the way of life completely like almost mummified, encased in time, where people were found crouching in their positions as the ash covered the city in an incredibly rapid pace. The structure of the city was preserved immaculately by the rapid covering of the city, basically encasing the city in volcanic ash. And off the top of my head, I cannot remember the exact year that the site was discovered, but it was in the second half of the 20th century. It was in the 60s and the 70s, in that time frame. And it was a huge story on National Geographic magazine, and it remains one of the most desirable places for people visiting Italy to go and get a look at ancient Roman life. Here you see a look of a Roman street in Pompeii, a look at a portrait of what a couple of Romans, what it may have looked like in Pompeii. And Pompeii was a resort town in a way, and so there were lots of how should we say it? There were like a lot of escorts, if you will, in Pompeii. So there were brothels and these types of places for very well-off people. And they found evidence of the practice of Epicureanism in Pompeii. Epicureanism, the hedonistic philosophy of the Hellenistic age. Here's a look at a Colosseum in Pompeii. In inside an amphitheater where you might see plays, other outdoor events. Roman building was very important as well. Romans were the first to really master the use of concrete. Their building of a navy, which really occurred for the first time during the Punic Wars, kept the Mediterranean free of pirates and facilitated the movement of people and ideas like Christianity across the Mediterranean. They built tremendous aqueducts, and I'll show you a picture of an aqueduct in a moment. They built tremendous aqueducts to move water from the hinterland into cities so that they could facilitate the many baths that were located throughout the city of Rome. There were all kinds of public baths throughout the city of Rome. There was a tremendous road system that facilitated the movement of people, of goods, and ideas, and so forth. Roman roads were generally wide. They were generally marked, meaning they had road markings, allowing for speedy travel, trade, and facilitating long-distance movement of goods and commercial agriculture. This is a look at a Roman aqueduct. It's in southern Europe. Of course, the famous Roman Colosseum. The Colosseum, they used to actually, the Roman Colosseum used to, if you go to see it, you'll notice that the bottom of it looks almost like a honeycomb. And it was below the flooring where the combatants and so forth would have been housed. And they even at times would flood the floor of the Colosseum and have mock naval battles in the Roman Colosseum. The Roman family was dominated by something called a pater family. This was almost like a way to think about this is that the Roman family was organized almost like a state within a household, where the head of the state was the man, the father, and where everyone below them were effectively under the ultimate direction of the father. And the father had quite profound powers over children and so forth. Roman society was organized ideally around certain constructs of right behavior for gender and so forth, for genders and so forth. For example, Augustus Caesar deemed that if a marriage had ended, if a person had been widowed, that they had to, by law, marry after 2 years. Augustus Caesar also passed laws against promiscuity. He, in fact, exiled his own daughter for allegedly being promiscuous, even though he himself had many mistresses. But he tried to pass laws that would sort of enhance the sort of traditional Roman family values, if you will. And these included laws against promiscuity. These included laws about marriage and so forth. Roman society also had tremendous gaps of wealth and inequality. Of course, Tiberius Gracchus, for example, was the reformer before the Romans, or at the outset, really, of the Roman Civil War period, in which he tried to pass huge reforms by redistributing land and limiting the amount of land that someone could own. And these types of activities created him a lot of very powerful enemies, and this resulted ultimately in his murder. But there was tremendous issues of wealth and inequality in Rome. Slavery. There's many, many different types of slaves in Rome. Greeks were often brought into Roman households as slaves, as educators. But many slaves worked very, very hard on the latifundia plantation estates. Spartacus in his revolt was on Sicily, and of course he was a slave working on one of these large estates. And of course, Roman religion, gods like Jupiter, Mars, and so forth, was a religion that was based to a large degree on adaptations from Greek religion. And of course, ultimately, the Christian sect will become the dominant sect in Rome and will eventually become the state religion of Rome, legalized in 313 by Constantine. All right, guys, I hope this is helpful. Thanks, guys.